When you are doing an experiment on yourself, you are creating science. You're coming up with a hypothesis. I think, for example, with me, I think creatine monohydrate from everything I'm reading is going to make me increase my lean muscle tissue and decrease body fat. So I decided to do my own experiment about it. I created an N of 1 experiment that allowed me to test my hypothesis, gather evidence, and create a result that said yes. Are you tired of trying every single tip from those experts online who promise magical results? I get it. You're still sick, you're still tired, you're still confused, and you're bloated all of the time, and you just want something that works. What I'm going to teach you about in this video is that you are not the problem. The problem is the information overwhelm on the internet. So what I'm going to empower you to do in this video is to start doing simple, effective strategies to stop the noise and really tune into your own body so that you can figure out what works for you. Welcome back. I'm Kristin Rowell with Energetically Efficient, and I'm so glad to have you here today. Let's get into today's video. I wanted to create this video because it was a couple of years ago. I was in Omaha, Nebraska, and this was originally a keto summit that was renamed. In any event, I gave a talk about this, and I titled it, "You Are an N of 1 Experiment, so start experimenting with your body." Now, once I set the stage for you, you're going to be like, oh my God, Kristin, why didn't I think of this? And here's what I really want to just share with you. The fact that there is so much information online causes the average person to suffer from information overwhelm. We're all guilty of it. Should I do keto? Should I do carnivore? Should I carb cycle? Should I go vegan? Should I eat a vegetarian diet? Should I do HIIT workouts? Should I work out fasted? Should I not work out fasted? Should I even fast at all? Should I do longer fasts? What sort of exercise is best for me? Is it really walking or do I need to run? Should I be sprinting? Do I need to strength train? Or am I going to get bulky? What's this thing with Pilates? Have you ever heard of celery juice? I mean, think about the number of questions that you could ask. And I get questions like this all of the time. And the reason is there is no shortage of information on the internet that is being spewed out regularly by people who purport to be experts in a variety of topics. There is science about a lot of the recommendations out there, but then there are a lot of recommendations that have no scientific background whatsoever. So what I recommend that you consider to cut through the information overwhelm is to follow the tips that I'm going to recommend to you in today's podcast episode. And that is that I want you to start conducting experiments on your own body. So I'm going to tell you a little story about one of mine. If you listen to my creatine episode, you've likely heard this, but I'll make it short because I want you to understand the power of how an experiment might work for you. I had never taken creatine before May of 2021. And that month, I decided to finally take it because I kept reading so much information online about how valuable creatine was for you. So I decided, okay, I'm going to do an experiment. I didn't just start willy-nilly taking creatine because I wouldn't know whether or not I had an effect from it. I decided to do a DEXA scan at the beginning of my experiment in May of 2021, and then do another DEXA scan at what I was scheduling for the end of my experiment in August of 2021. So this was a 90-day experiment intentionally. I wanted to see if I started taking creatine monohydrate every single day from May until August, would it make a difference, for example, in my body composition? Would it make a difference in my energy? Would it make a difference in how I showed up at the gym? Did I have more strength? These were all the things I was reading that creatine was promising, and so I thought I'd give it a try. So in my 3-month experiment, which I talk about in detail in my creatine episode, so please don't miss that, I actually was able to gain lean muscle tissue. I gained, I think it was I don't have the data in front of me, I apologize, but I think it was that I gained 3 pounds of muscle tissue and lost 2% body fat, or maybe I lost 3% body fat and gained 2 pounds of muscle tissue. In any event, the results were amazing. I lost body fat and gained lean muscle tissue at the same time. And that's the goal. That's what I work on with my clients all of the time. That's what my clients do all the time. I'm very successful at coming up with a formula that allows you to gain lean muscle tissue and lose body fat at the same time, which is amazing. It allows you to be able to eat more when you're just sitting here because you're going to burn more calories at rest than someone who is sitting here with less muscle on their body. So I share that story with you because I conducted an experiment on my body. It's true that there is a ton of science supporting the efficacy of creatine monohydrate, that supports the mechanism of action of creatine monohydrate. And I don't want to get into that in this episode with you because, like I said, I detailed all of that in the creatine episode. So again, go listen to that. But the bigger point that I want to drive home to is I chose to take all of this information that I was hearing and I chose to do my own experiment. So I want to back up. I'm going to just pull something up for you. I'm looking down at my computer because I want to talk about some of the background of this to encourage you to consider conducting an experiment on yourself. So first, I want to define for you guys, what is a scientist? What does it even mean to be a scientist? Because if you go online, you will see people shaming different scientific studies. You will see scientists arguing about studies. You will see lay people arguing about scientific studies. You will see certain PhDs and doctors claiming that they know everything because of their science. You will also hear certain PhDs and doctors going outside of their general knowledge of expertise and opining on all sorts of different things that aren't even what they studied simply because they have a doctor title by their name. So what I want you to understand is here's what a scientist is by definition itself, okay? So a scientist is, I'm just going to read these to you, a person who is studying or has expert knowledge in a particular subject, okay? That's a scientist. A scientist is also a professional who conducts and gathers research to further the knowledge in a particular area. A scientist is an expert who studies or works in one of the sciences. It's also any person with an interest in the sciences, from amateurs to professionals. All of these people may be considered scientists. It's someone who has studied science and whose job is to teach or do research in science. This is another kind of scientist. And then what the Science Council says is that it is someone who systematically gathers and uses research and evidence to make hypotheses and test them to gain and share understanding and knowledge. Okay? It's someone who is gathering and using research and evidence, so they're researching and using evidence to make hypotheses and test them to gain and share understanding and knowledge. And I really, really like this quote. This is from Richard Feynman. The test of all knowledge is experiment. Experiment is the sole judge of scientific truth. And I agree with that. Here's another one. All life is an experiment. The more experiments you make, the better. That's by Ralph Waldo Emerson. You may have heard of him, of course. Amazing literary genius. And a gentleman by the name of Max Planck said, experiment is the only means of knowledge at our disposal. Everything else is poetry, imagination. And I really, really like that one as I start this teaching today, because I want you to think about the fact that truly, when we are just reading information in the internet, when we are taking courses and just learning information, when we are watching some of these debates happen between different scientists, but we are never taking and applying that information to our own body for a long enough period of time to conduct an experiment, it really is all just poetry. It's just imagination. It isn't going to give you any value unless you create an experiment with it. So by the end of this podcast, I hope that I've encouraged you to come up with and create your own experiment. And I will just say, as a plug for you to consider doing this, after I gave this talk 2 years ago and I just remember the name, at the Hard to Kill Summit in Omaha, Nebraska, put on by my amazing friend, Dr. Fit and Fabulous, Jamie Seaman, who I adore. After I gave this talk, there were people who came up to me who were in tears about this. There were people who said this talk alone was worth the price of admission into this entire conference, which is such a compliment to me, and I really, really appreciate it. But I'm only sharing that with you because before you throw this episode out and be like, okay, this isn't as interesting, she's not talking about some valuable scientific data, I am, because I'm talking about how you can apply all of this amazing stuff that you read and learn to your own body, which is what I recommend that everyone do. Okay, so what kinds of scientific evidence do we normally see? There are things called systematic reviews and meta-analysis. And I would say that this is one of the top kinds of tiers of scientific evidence, or science rather, that we revere in the literature. We also talk about, and I'm sure you've heard influencers online, doctors online, people say RCTs are it. They're the top of the top. And RCT stands for randomized control trial. So it's a randomized control trial, randomized clinical trial, but really a randomized control trial with definitive or non-definitive results. There's also something called cohort studies. There's also case control studies, cross-sectional surveys, and case reports. And those sort of go down, as I would say, in their weight, or in terms of what weight we give them in the scientific literature. But there's also an N of 1 experiment. That is an experiment. And guess what? an N of 1 could be you. So listen to what an N of 1 is. An N of 1 trial is a clinical trial in which a single patient is the entire trial, a single case study. The N of 1 clinical trial, the ultimate strategy for individualizing medicine. This was a paper that I found on PubMed, and I will put this citation underneath this video so you can look up that paper for yourself. But my whole point in sharing this with you guys is an N of 1 clinical trial, when you are doing an experiment on yourself, you are creating science. You're coming up with a hypothesis. I think, for example, with me, I think creatine monohydrate, from everything I'm reading, is going to make me increase my lean muscle tissue and decrease body fat. So I decided to do my own experiment about it. I created an N of 1 experiment that allowed me to test my hypothesis, gather evidence, and create a result that said, yes, in fact, for me, that was true. And let's be honest, we don't listen to all of these podcasts from people like Andrew Huberman or Peter Attia or any different garden variety scientist that you would identify or doctor. We don't listen to those because we just want to gain all the knowledge. We listen to them because we're trying to figure out, are there any tips in here that are right for me? Is there some valuable information in here that I could use and apply to my own life? Or maybe share with someone else who I love because I want them to get healthier. Well, the best way for us to do that is to listen and learn some of that data and then try it on ourselves. So what is the scientific method? There are 3 parts to the scientific method. The first part of the scientific method is that you create a hypothesis. Using my creatine example, it would be, like I just mentioned, I think taking creatine monohydrate is going to increase my lean muscle tissue and decrease my body fat. That was my hypothesis. Number 2, I'm going to conduct an experiment. And my experiment, I recommend that you conduct an experiment that's at least 30 days in length. I do think 30 days is plenty, but you could conduct an experiment that for me was 90 days, where I did it from May to August of 2021. And in that 90 days was my experiment. And then number 3, you would measure the results. So this is probably one of the things I see people make the most mistake in, is they don't actually conduct an experiment that measures where they're starting and that measures where they're ending. So when clients hire me to work with me privately, one-on-one, and even when you're in my courses, I encourage you. Now, private clients for one-on-one actually have to do this. Excuse me, I'm just going to change my legs here, how I am sitting. One moment, and get my water. Okay, so my private one-on-one clients, they have to get a DEXA scan or a bod pod at the beginning of our work together, because my argument always is, you cannot know where you're going unless you know where you're starting. A lot of people have what's the word I would use? I don't want to say skewed because that sounds negative. I don't want to say distorted because that sounds negative, but what I'm trying to convey is they have not a realistic sense of where they are starting. Some people are very realistic, but some people are hanging on to a version of them from their 20s or their early 30s. And they'll tell me, okay, I think I'm probably about this body fat percentage. And they're at least 10 percentage points higher or more. And it is a very serious wake-up call when they get that DEXA scan. And so I always say, listen, I'm so glad you did this. There is no judgment around your starting DEXA scan. I wanted you to do this because A, it snaps you into reality. So you can say, wow, this is really important. I have to take control of my health. I don't want to have a body fat number that's high, because I know that high of body fat and that much metabolic dysfunction is only going to lead to all sorts of disease down the line. And just by way of a reminder on this topic, because I've shared this in other podcast episodes, I want to remind you guys that underlying all of what are called the 4 horsemen of death is metabolic dysfunction. So the 4 primary categories for why people die, okay, from a health reason, setting aside car accidents or those kinds of things, the 4 horsemen of death considered in the medical community and science are, number 1, all of your cardiovascular events. So these are your heart attacks, your strokes, your blood clots, your aneurysms, those kinds of things. Those are all considered one of the 4 horsemen of death. The second category is going to be your brain-related neurological disorders. So your Alzheimer's, your dementia, anything that's related to the brain, that is going to be the second category. The third category is your cancers. Any kind of cancer whatsoever is going to be another reason that people die. And then the fourth reason people die is because of metabolic dysfunction. This would be things like diabetes, type 2 diabetes, and all of the other kinds of calamity that come with metabolic dysfunction. But the main thing I want you to hear in this, which I've shared about in other episodes, is underlying all 4 of those reasons, underlying cardiovascular events, underlying neurological disorders, underlying all cancers, and underlying metabolic dysfunction is metabolic dysfunction. So when you get your metabolic health better, when you get to a healthy weight, when you lose all of that excess body fat, when you drastically reduce your triglycerides, when you get your fasting glucose down, when you get your fasting insulin down, when you have an amazing lipid profile, you are less likely to get cancer, neurological disorders, or have any cardiovascular events. Everything stems from the state of your metabolic health. It's why I scream about it from the rooftops. It's the most important thing that you can do. And that means dialing in your nutrition. And of course, you guys know I'm a broken record about this, but strength training intensely. And I always recommend twice per week at a gym, which I love and will soon be opening in Nashville, called Discover Strength. Okay, so the reason that I wanted to go off on those 4 things is because when you're thinking of the experiment that you're going to conduct, I want you to focus on what is a way that I can improve my metabolic health, because everything is going to get better once I do that. I'm going to reduce my risk of cancer. I'm going to reduce my risk of getting Alzheimer's and dementia, and I'm going to reduce my risk of any cardiovascular events simply by improving my metabolic health. So how exciting is that? You can read about every fandangled supplement on the planet to help boost heart health, or every single different kind of exercise or brain teaser to ward off Alzheimer's and dementia. But the main thing you want to do, you guys, is you need to improve your metabolic health, because everything gets better when you do that. It dramatically reduces the inflammation in your body. And at the root of cancer, at the root of Alzheimer's and dementia, and at the root of all cardiovascular events is inflammation in the body. We have to get the inflammation down if we don't want to call in any of those 4 horsemen of death. Okay, so I measured the results because I did this 3-month experiment with creatine from May until August. And you can measure the results any certain way, but I recommend that you get a DEXA scan. So remember, going back to the DEXA scan, it's going to shock you into reality. It's going to show you where you're starting. And that way, once you do your experiment, whether you decide to go keto for 30 days, to go vegan for 30 days, don't recommend vegan for 30 days, I'm sorry. I'll do a whole different podcast episode on that, but I do not recommend it. Maybe you decide to go carnivore for 30 days. Maybe you decide to do a full alkaline diet for 30 days. Maybe you decide to join my Radiant Reset course when I run that quarterly, which is January, April, July, and October. Maybe you decide to join that, and after 2 weeks of the Radiant Reset course, you feel so amazing. You say, I want to continue to do this, Kristin. I'm going to eat like this for another 2 weeks. And I'm going to compare a DEXA scan that I got before your Radiant Reset and DEXA scan after. I really recommend that you get a bod pod or a DEXA scan, or maybe a full set of blood work or something, and then conduct your experiment and then test again at the end. You can't know whether or not this worked for you unless you are testing in some way. And maybe it's simply that you're testing, and this is something that, might work for some people. It doesn't work for many, but it might work for some. I find that some people are not in tune enough with their body to do this. But if you're really in tune with your body and you can journal about the way you're feeling, and you're really honest in your journaling when you start the experiment, and then you can journal at the end of your experiment as to how you're feeling, that may be enough for you. That may be enough of a, oh my gosh, this experiment really worked because I measurably feel different. And that's how I'm going to measure my results. Okay, let me take a sip of water here. One moment. Always staying so hydrated. I love hydration. I have Redmond's Relight electrolytes in this, which I always do. Okay, so here's some other potential experiments. And I talked about this when I was on stage at this conference, but I want to share this with you guys because it's such valuable information. So one of them was take creatine for 90 days and see if you can gain muscle and lose fat. That's obviously an experiment I did. Another one is, and this is an intense one, but I'm just suggesting, fast for 5 days and see if you can do it without losing muscle. I did that experiment too. I will do a separate podcast episode about my 5-day fast. I'm very excited to report to you guys about that. But listen, if I tell you all about my 5-day fast, what would make my heart swell with pride after you listen to it is if you went out and considered actually doing it. And maybe 5 days is too much for you. Maybe you said, okay, I've never even fasted for a day, Kristin. Start with that. Start with doing what I consider a day. It's really a little longer than a day, but just start with a 36-hour fast. Eat dinner on Sunday night and don't eat any again until Tuesday morning when you have breakfast. So you would not eat at all on Monday, and then you have 2 sleeps. I worked my way up to a 5-day fast. But again, I did an experiment. I took a DEXA scan at the beginning of the 5 days. I took a DEXA scan at the end of the 5 days. And in that 5 days, I lost body fat. I lost a tremendous amount of visceral fat. And I mean tremendous amount. I only had like a half a pound of visceral fat as it was, but I went down to 0.1. I virtually had no visceral fat on my body after this 5-day fast. And then that was amazing because I not only didn't lose muscle, but this might sound crazy, I gained a little bit of muscle during that 5-day experiment. So it was amazing. And people are blown away by those results. So I have to do a podcast episode about that soon. You will learn so much about yourself if you do a 5-day fast. I actually recently just took a private client through a 5-day fast. He did this and he said, now I get it. After he got done, he said, you could have never prepared me for this. Like all of the amazing things I would learn about my body and how good I would feel and how like the inflammation was gone. Like he enjoyed it so much. He said, I can see why you did this and why you promote it. And I also can see why it takes people a while to emotionally get their heads around, because thinking about not eating for 5 days is way too intimidating to most people. But the reality is, because I know so much about how the body works, I knew that I would be in such deep ketosis and I would thrive, and it was just amazing. So a podcast episode coming about that soon. Okay, another potential experiment you could do would be to eat strict carnivore for 30 days. Yep, yours truly has also done that one too. I did that one in December. I can't remember what year it was. But it was for the entire month of December I did it, and I just wanted to experiment with it. For me, I definitely did not love it at the time that I did it. Now, I have excellent gut health right now, and I don't know that I could say I had excellent gut health at the time that I did it. And so for me, I really, really struggled with digestive issues the entire month. And by digestive issues, in case anyone was interested, I struggled with having diarrhea like literally all the time for 30 days, which is no way to live. But I was determined, you guys, to go through this experiment. And the more and more research I did about everything I was reading, it was like, oh, it's only going to last 2 weeks. It's only going to last 3 weeks. I promise it'll be over soon. It was never over for me. So I was very happy to go back to real food. And I will just tell you that I discovered through that process that my body just loves fiber. Like I need to have fiber to have an excellent digestive system. And so I feel really good about the state of my digestive health now. Okay, so what are some other potential experiments you could do? You could do having something to do with running, right? You could hire a running coach. You could do a 5K, hire a running coach, get some coaching around it, maybe even coach yourself. Look up running programs on the internet. Do some really good 5K running training and then run another 5K at the end of that. And your hypothesis could be, if I commit to running, X number of days per week, really commit to this, follow this training program, I can shave X minutes off my 5K time, whatever it might be. But consider creating a hypothesis as a scientist would that can be measured, that can be tested through whatever experiment you want to do. I'm super, super excited for you guys to try this. So for some homework that I want to make sure that I leave you with is, what is one experiment that you will do after you listen to this podcast, and I want you to write it down. If 30 days seems like plenty to you, then that's great. In fact, you guys, I'll even give you permission to just do 2 weeks and consider joining me in October to do the Radiant Reset with us for 2 weeks. 14 days of eating super clean and taking all of the noise out of your diet. I am just telling you, as someone who has done this for this many years, it is life-changing. So that's an experiment you could just do in 14 days. And for that, I'm just coming up with this hypothesis right now off the top, but it's, if I participate in Kristin's Radiant Reset course, I will lose, let's say I will lose somewhere between 3 and 5 pounds. I will have a flatter stomach. I will have more energy. I will be in a better mood, and I will have clearer skin. Okay, that's bold, what I just put out there. And so I'm gonna challenge you guys to do that. Consider joining me in October for my Radiant Reset. My team and I will set the dates for that soon, but it would be amazing to have you. And whatever date you're listening to this in the future, note that we do that course, the Radiant Reset, in January of each year, in April of each year, in July of each year, and October of each year. So you have all those 4 different opportunities to join us, but really consider conducting an experiment on your body. It is truly the best way to learn. So I do have some highlights from my 5-day fasting experiment just to give you a preview of that. And then I'll do a much longer, more detailed episode about that at some point soon so that you can understand exactly what my protocol was, what I did each day, how much I slept, how I structured my days so that I could make sure I was not eating for 5 days and that I had amazing results. So I've got this here. This was in 2023 that I did this. So my 5-day fast, I did my DEXA scan on the 2nd of February. So that was my first one. And then I did my second DEXA scan on the 6th of February. So that was at the beginning and at the end. So when I started, so this was great. I'm just looking at the data again. So I lost 3% body fat and I gained 2 pounds of lean muscle tissue, which is incredible to do over 5 days. But what was more important, and this is what I was trying to remember, my visceral fat went from 0.5. Okay, so 0.5 is already good. We want to be under 1 pound of visceral fat. Now, just as a reminder, your visceral fat is a fat around your organs. This is the most dangerous fat you can have. We do not want much visceral fat. It has to be less than 1 pound for you to be healthy metabolically. The higher that number is, the more you're at risk of all sorts of cardiovascular events. In the 5 days, my visceral fat went from 0.5 pounds to 0.1 pounds. It was virtually gone on my body, which was amazing. Okay. And then my body fat went from, it was the first time I had ever seen it at 20. So it went from 20.1 and it went down to 17.5. So that was excellent. And then my lean mass went from 108 pounds. So I had 108 pounds of lean mass on my body, and that went up to 110 pounds. So again, gaining 2 pounds of lean muscle tissue, losing 3% body fat, or I guess that's technically 2.5, but still excellent in 5 days. So I was really, really happy with that. And like I said, I will do a whole different podcast episode that'll get into all of the details about that. I should tell you, when I did this 5-day fast, that I did this with a friend, a guy friend of mine, and his visceral fat went from 0.7 down to 0.3, which was also excellent. His body fat went from 11.9% down to 10.5%, which is amazing. So I always remind people that 10% body fat for men is like 20% body fat for women. So we have about a 10 percentage point difference. So he's also in excellent shape. His lean mass went from 152 up to 153. So he also gained a pound of muscle, and his total mass went from 182 down to 180. So he did amazing. Also, this was so much fun. And I just love leading people through experiments like this because, and again, you guys can do this for yourself. I'm really wanting to share this with you because I want to encourage you to create an experiment. If you're going to create an experiment from this, I would love if you would make a comment below this podcast. The YouTube video would be amazing. Spotify, Apple, however you want to do it. But just comment about whether this inspired you to do an experiment and what experiment you're going to do, because I'm telling you guys, this is how we learn about our bodies. We are all different. You are bio-individual. What works really well for me may not work as well for you. What works really well for you may not work as well for the next person. So I really encourage you to test your body. I have clients all the time who are like, oh, I ate that one thing and I just noticed I had weird digestive stuff. I felt my skin was itchy. I said, great. You figured out you have a food sensitivity to it. Other people can eat that with flying colors and you're sensitive to it. It's so good to be tuning into our bodies and learning about our bodies all the time, because this is how you create a more intentional and conscious life, which is what I always want you to do. Okay, well, I really appreciate you being here. Thank you so much. I hope I've encouraged you to do an experiment. Remember, you can do an N of 1 experiment anytime. You just have to create your hypotheses, gather your evidence, and then measure the results. So do not forget to measure the results at the beginning. You have to start with something to measure, and then at the end so that you can figure out your hypotheses, your experiment. And I would love to hear about what you do. Thanks for being here, and I will see you on another episode of the Energetically Efficient Show. Bye-bye.